Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Clark Honors College, the University of Oregon Alumni Association, and the University of Oregon Black Alumni Network, it's my pleasure to introduce this special faculty talk featuring Courtney Thorsson, Associate Professor of English here at the UO and in the Clark Honors College. Today, we're celebrating the release of her work, The Sisterhood, How a Network of Black Women Writers Changed American Culture. This book is not just a testament to literary excellence, but a beacon of the transformative power of Black feminist collaboration. It's an exploration of how these voices have shaped and continue to influence the landscape of American literature and culture. It's also my pleasure today to introduce those of you who don't know her already to Ericka Warren, a Duck alum with a BA in East Asian Studies and an MBA from Lundquist College of Business. Ericka is also one of Oregon's most talented, creative, and passionate change agents when it comes to equitable engagement in creating inclusive communities. In her work as a consultant and a facilitator, she brings years of experience and acumen to the table and having the tough conversations that help us come together as a community. She's the president of the UO Black Alumni Network and has also served on the UO President's Diversity Advisory Council for more than 5 years. Ericka is this year's recipient of the UOAA Jean Johnson Award, the Alumni Association's highest award recognizing outstanding service to the organization. She was an advisor and a facilitator for Portland's Interstate 5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project, helping Oregon's leaders understand the history of the Albina neighborhood and how it's been affected by the longstanding freeway. Her work with local governments, especially the city of Portland, is widely known as she has assisted officials in understanding the impacts their decisions have on diverse communities around libraries, roadways, sustainability, development, waterways, and beyond. And she knows music. Ericka is a talented singer, songwriter, musician, and producer. She's also putting on what will be one of Portland's signature events of the summer, the Rose City Cigar and Soul Festival. Welcome, Ericka, and thanks so much for being here with us today.
Wow, Carol, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to the Clark Honors College for partnering with us on this really, really awesome event. I want to give a warm U of O hello to all of you who are joining us in the virtual space. Hello to alumni and friends and all of you who share a deep passion for the written word. As Carol mentioned, my name's Ericka Warren, and I am really honored to serve the university as the president of the U of O Black Alumni Network. Today, as we come together, I also want to express my deep appreciation for all of you who are UOAA members. Your support make events like this possible for us. We're truly grateful for your connection and your commitment to this U of O community. For today's webinar, we are very privileged to have Dr. Courtney Thorsson. She's going to share insights from her book, The Sisterhood, How a Network of Black Women Writers Changed American Culture. This work not only chronicles a pivotal moment in literature, but also celebrates the collective strength and influence of Black women's voices in shaping our cultural narrative. Following Courtney's talk, we will transition. We'll have an opportunity for question and answer segment. Many of you have already submitted your questions when you registered for this event. I encourage you to continue the conversation. You can submit any additional questions through the Q&A feature that is below. At this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Courtney Thorsson. Courtney is an associate professor in the English department and Clark Honors College at the University of Oregon, where she teaches, studies, and writes about African American literature from its beginnings to the present, using Black feminist methods. Her new book, The Sisterhood, How a Network of Black Women Writers Changed American Culture, tells the story of how a remarkable community of Black women writers and intellectuals transformed political, literary, and academic cultures. Dr. Thorsson, thank you wholeheartedly for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ericka, for that introduction and for being my conversation partner today. I want to echo the words of gratitude and add to them. Thanks to the UO Alumni Association, the Clark Honors College, and the Black Alumni Network for hosting this event. Thanks, Carol Stabile and Elin England and Shannon Rose Peterson for the idea in the first place and for all your labor to make it happen. And as I say, thanks, Ericka Warren, for being my conversation partner today. So I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction and second chapter of my new book. And then Ericka and I will have some discussion and we'll open it up to your questions. So what I hope to do with this reading for about 15 to 20 minutes is set the table for a robust conversation about whatever interests you all for your work. And I'm going to stop looking at who's adding into the chat, but just a special shout out. I see a few former students, so love you that you're here. Great to see you. Thank you. Okay. The photo, The Sisterhood 1977, has become the subject of legend among readers, scholars, and writers since it first appeared in Evelyn White's book, Alice Walker, A Life, in 2004. I saw it for the first time when I was a graduate student, when my beloved mentor teacher friend, Farah Jasmine Griffin, told me there was this picture I just absolutely had to see in Evelyn White's new book. I rushed to get a copy. I opened to the gallery of black and white photos in the middle of the book, and I saw this stunning image of powerful, smiling Black women writers. Some of them I recognized right away. I think probably back then I recognized Toni Morrison and Alice Walker right away. Maybe I spotted Ntozake Shange. Some of the other names and faces were new to me. Evelyn White's caption describes the photo this way, quote, "A group of Black women writers in New York who met informally in the 1970s. So I slapped a Post-it note on the page so that it would be at hand and I could open it anytime I needed to take a look at the photo for inspiration or anything else. And I started a folder just taking notes about this group of women who called themselves the Sisterhood. It was about 5 years later when the late, truly great Black feminist scholar and institution builder, Cheryl Wall, she knew that I had a sisterhood project bubbling in the back of my mind. And she told me very excitedly that she had spotted something she thought was a reference to the sisterhood in the poet June Jordan's papers at Harvard. So I made a records request from that archive, and that led me to an agenda and formal meeting minutes for the group. This was really my first big clue that the sisterhood was not just a group of women who got together once in a while, but really an organization that met on a regular basis to tackle specific issues. Several years later, about 2010, 2011 at this point, I'm in my first year as an assistant professor at the University of Oregon, and I make my first trip to Alice Walker's archives at Emory University. I'm sitting in this ornate, beautiful, high-ceiling room, and that's the first time I held a physical copy of the Sisterhood photo. I turned it over and I saw a handwritten note from June Jordan, quote, "Dearest Alice, remember the days when you needed that double-breasted overcoat? Much love to you, always." The names of the women were there too, in purple ink and different handwriting. This told me at least two things. First, that the quote, love visible in the photo was real and lasting, always, as Jordan wrote. And second, that Alice Walker knew the group was important enough to go back after the fact and make sure the names of all the women were written on the back of the photograph. This book, The Sisterhood, How a Network of Black Women Writers Changed American Culture, draws on Sisterhood members' poetry, fiction, essays, meeting minutes, correspondence, biographies, and my own original research interviews with members of the Sisterhood to narrate their everyday work to secure publication, publicity, and recognition for Black women writers. The image, this photo, The Sisterhood 1977, records much more than one incredible Sunday in February of 77. Rather, it's a window into the everyday collaborative work among Black women writers that changed literary history. So as I've said, the Sisterhood was far more formal and structured than most writing about it suggests. after June Jordan and Alice Walker convened that first meeting in February of 1977, the group met at least once a month, actually sometimes more than once a month, but at least once a month for over 2 years. They kept minutes of their meetings and they collected dues. And in fact, at one meeting, they decided the initial dues would be $5, and the poet Audre Lorde paid it right there on the spot. The members took turns hosting meetings in their Manhattan and Brooklyn apartments. The 30 or so women who attended one or more meetings of the Sisterhood understood they could always bring one guest to any meeting, as long as that guest was a Black woman writer, editor, journalist, or academic. In practice, this meant that members were, as the womanist theologian Renita Weems said to me, quote, really just high-achieving women who love literature, feminists who love literature, who were trying to move the needle. They decided to name themselves the Sisterhood because that term, the Sisterhood, signified kinship forged in political consciousness of the 1960s. Their name reflects the group's vision of collaboration rooted in love for self, for one another, and for Black women's writing. They called it the Sisterhood right from the first meeting, and they always capitalized it, the Sisterhood, in all their documents right from the start. Sisterhood is a terrifically useful word. It's gender specific, racially specific, it's familial and intimate, but lateral rather than hierarchical, and it has a kind of openness. Sisterhood could have turned out to be any kind of group, a writing workshop, a press, a professional association, a book club. But it was over the course of their 2 years meeting that this group worked together to figure out and revise the Sisterhood to mean a group that worked to get Black women's writings published, read, reviewed, and eventually studied and taught in colleges and universities. They used their personal and affective bonds to struggle together to transform public culture. A place exclusively for Black women was an absolute necessity for these teachers, journalists, editors, and writers. In the 1960s and early 70s, as political activists, they had experienced the racism of the white women's liberation movement, which largely depended on the domestic labor of Black and Latinx women to get white women out of the home and into the workforce. And Sisterhood members had experienced the sexism and homophobia of some civil rights and Black power groups, which tended to depend on endless and largely invisible labor from Black women, but focused attention almost entirely on a few charismatic Black men leaders. By the mid-1970s, Sisterhood members were navigating intense hostility at their jobs in workplaces that were dominated by white men. So the group was a place to read and talk about Black women's writings and get a break from the overwhelming whiteness of their day job. As the Pulitzer Prize-winning cultural critic, Margot Jefferson, also author of 2 terrific memoirs, which I highly recommend to you, Margot Jefferson described it to me in our interview this way, quote, I cannot tell you what a relief it was to have this other life, meaning a life among Black women, because she and others were alone or one of the few at white institutions, from academic departments to publishing houses to magazines such as Newsweek, Time, and even Ms. The women of the Sisterhood strategized to, as Margot put it, formulate basic practical ways of getting through things and preserving your integrity. This space was a foundation for their literary, scholarly, and journalistic progressive work, advocating for Black women's literature and liberation in hostile institutions such as universities, magazines, newspapers, and book publishers. From its very modest beginnings, the Sisterhood went on to set and achieve ambitious goals, and they stopped meeting in early 1979 as pressures on individual members and dissent within the group grew. For some, the demands of their paid professional work as writers, editors, and scholars became really difficult to balance with the unpaid or underpaid work of political, literary, and academic organizing. Economic class and generational differences and varying degrees of success in the literary marketplace also meant that different members wanted and needed different things from the group. As Black women writers became more and more visible, they struggled to control the terms of that visibility. Members of the Sisterhood disagreed in private and in print about Michelle Wallace's 1978 book, Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, which was the subject of extensive media coverage and public debate. the virulence of racism and sexism at the dawn of the Reagan era, federal disinvestment in social welfare, and a sense of despair after years without any one movement setting a clear agenda for Black liberation, all contributed to the dissolution of the Sisterhood and many other radical groups of the late 70s and early 80s. Against all odds, amid these serious obstacles to collaboration from within and outside of the group, the Sisterhood made substantive changes to the content of popular magazines, and they helped get Black women's books published, reviewed, and recognized. They also developed intellectual communities and wrote books that would matter in popular and academic American culture for many decades to come. So now I'm going to jump ahead, and here we are in the latter part of the second chapter. Misogynist and racist reactions to Black women's writing, and perhaps especially to highly visible successes like Ntozake Shange's choreo poem for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, made it necessary for the Sisterhood to be exclusively for Black women. Meeting minutes reveal their determination to be, and this is how they put it in their meeting minutes, an association of Black women who are writers, poets, artists in the broadest sense of these words. The Sisterhood will serve the purpose of unifying us and strengthening our bonds with one another through the sharing of ourselves, our art, our experiences, our food, our love, and our ideas. By gathering in one place, making time at least once a month, committing, showing up, they provided each other with this kind of unification and strength. From the moment she joined the group at its second meeting, the art historian Judith Wilson recognized its importance, not initially, but eventually as a place for professional networking and advancement, but primarily as a form of what she called psychological support that came from, quote, the experience of seeing that there were so many of us. Being in a room with a group of Black women writers and intellectuals was really reaffirming, is what Wilson told me in our interview. In this space of affirmation, the Sisterhood accomplished a lot of practical tasks. They gathered names and kept a central Rolodex of all their connections in publishing in the art world. They invited new members. They developed ideas for possible investors, and they discussed the possibility of incorporating as Kizzy enterprises. Now, I just have to take a moment to say that Kizzy is the first name of the first enslaved person to be born in the United States, and Alex Haley's Roots, which Haley's Roots had been a major best-selling book in late '76. And then about 2 weeks before the first time the Sisterhood met, the miniseries based on Roots aired in 1977 and had, blockbuster ratings and numbers. So everybody had seen Roots in early '77. So they were inspired, the Sisterhood was, to think of Kizzy Enterprises as a name for their potential corporation. The women's experience in smaller consciousness raising groups and political organizations like the National Black Feminist Organization taught these women cooperative practices and basic logistics like how to have a meeting, how to lead, how to follow. Those consciousness raising groups of the 60s and 70s were devoted to study, and they were often explicitly anti-capitalist. The Sisterhood used those tools to different ends by engaging in professional networking, such as creating their Rolodex, and participating in a capitalist marketplace, such as planning to incorporate and seeking out investors. At the second February meetings, this is February 20th, '77, Judith Wilson became the official secretary for the group. That's her word, secretary. And in that role, she produced a kind of archive for the Sisterhood. Wilson, quote, volunteered to take minutes at Sisterhood meetings because of her high school training in note-hand. And note-hand is a form of shorthand that she told me was, quote, intended to prepare us career-minded girls for our secretarial futures. She instead found it incredibly useful to her note-taking as an undergraduate and graduate student, as a journalist, as a member of the Sisterhood, and later as a doctor of art history. And she studied and taught, but she taught courses in art history at University of Virginia, Yale, and other institutions before concluding her career at UC Irvine, where she retired in 2006. Now, one interesting thing I uncovered in my archival research is that there are actually varying versions of minutes for Sisterhood meetings. Sisterhood members also made their own notes on their personal hard copies of the minutes, and they archived those notes in all kinds of different ways. So the poet June Jordan's copy of Judith Wilson's minutes for that February 20th meeting are, for example, filed in June Jordan's paper with some totally unrelated correspondence, but also an undated note from Vertime Grosvenor. Vertime Grosvenor, who appears in the Sisterhood photo, is a major culinary anthropologist, self-defined culinary griot, appeared in the films Beloved and Julie Dash's Daughter of the Dust, hosted the America's Family Kitchen on PBS, and author of the 1970 book Vibration Cooking, which you got to check out if you haven't. So June Jordan has filed those minutes with a postcard attached from Vertime that reads, quote, "Finally found this, see you at the Sisterhood next." And that's attached to a set of minutes that begin with a 4-part agenda. But there's also a separate attached note that lets Sisterhood members know that Audrine Ballard of Essence, novelist and editor Toni Morrison, and Tazaki Shange are all working on various other projects on behalf of the group, even though they're not at that February 20th meeting. Those minutes also address practical matters, such as how the Sisterhood could sustain itself over the long term. The Sisterhood agreed they would, quote, "meet once a month on the 3rd Sunday of the month. Refreshments will be potluck, and sisters should feel free to bring other favorite things, records, poems, etc." So the minutes are really recording the group's commitment to collaboration, to a potluck, to having fun, records, poems, etc., and to documenting their collaborative work with a plan that minutes will be copied and sent to all members. Now, in addition to their kind of outward-facing work on publication and publicity, networking, professional advancement, the Sisterhood developed internal procedures that reflected their politics and attended to their personal and professional wellness. They talked about, quote, members' desires not to feel pressured to follow up on voluntary projects, but to do so at their own pace, and how to enhance the cohesiveness of their group. As they closed the April 77 meeting by setting the agenda for May, Alice Walker offered to invite Marcia Ann Gillespie, author of a recent editorial on Essence on depression, and Nana Maynard planned to report to the group on transcendental meditation. The meeting concluded with Alice Walker sharing slides and telling the group about a recent Black artist tour of Cuba. And finally, they set the next meeting for May 15th at Alice Walker's house. Those meeting minutes end with these plans, quote, "Wear walking shoes because if weather is good, Alice will conduct a tour of Prospect Park. In addition to depression, we will also discuss such matters as forming an unincorporated association and opening a bank account for the Sisterhood." So as a principle of Black feminist practice, the group stressed that their collaborative mode of organizing included care for self and for others as totally inseparable from this kind of practical literary, political, and academic work. The penultimate paragraph of the minutes for the following meeting, this is in May 77, read, quote, "The meeting then turned to discussion of the topic proposed last month, depression, and there followed a general discussion of individual members' problems in this area and methods of overcoming depression." This one sentence really reveals how much the group served as a source of emotional support. But the real brevity of this part of the minutes also suggests they kept some things out of the contents of their written records. In other words, they're minutes that go on and on about plans for incorporation and what their pitches to Essence, Ebony, and Miss would look like that those magazines publish more poets. But it's just this one sentence about the discussion of depression. In all their meetings, the Sisterhood maintained a very delicate balance among points of order, concrete plans, visible action, and discussion about matters both professional and personal. The poet Patricia Spears Jones writes, quote, "We talked about everything from the usual Black men versus Black women fusses to what was really good to read. We tried to find language to talk about who we are and what we do. How feminist were we? Did that have to do with Blackness or not? And why were we asked to separate our gender from our race? Did anyone ask the men?" These conversations were necessarily ephemeral, and members understood that the Sisterhood was worthy of documentation. This meant they needed to keep their own archives, which they did in art historian Judith Wilson's meeting minutes, scholar Veve Clark's proposals for getting poets published in Essence and Ebony, the 1977 photograph that's on the cover of my book, the official correspondence for the group that members Abike and later theologian Renita Weems wrote to the members, and then eventually the papers that some members placed in libraries and archives around the country. And even most recently, Patricia Spears Jones, poet laureate of New York State, placed her papers, I mean, just months ago at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And Patricia Spears Jones is one of the Sisterhood members whom I interview for this book. As the Sisterhood met, they wanted and needed to control the terms of their increasing visibility. They treated support among friends and colleagues as an important part of this documentation, but they also omitted certain personal details, perhaps imagining that scholars like me would study these meeting minutes decades later. The Sisterhood created a sustaining, all-Black, all-woman space that was both escape from and response to the backlash to for colored girls, the overwhelmingly white offices of places like Newsweek and Random House, academic departments that treated African-American literature as a fringe or minor subject, and racist political discourse about Black mothers. It was also, this work to support one another was contingent and sometimes fleeting. It was also concrete, detailed, and had lasting effects. Members knew then and know now that the Sisterhood's collaboration was important for their own lives and work and for the place of Black women's writing in American culture. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. You didn't need water or anything. Yes, Dr. Thorsson, thank you so much. This is a great opportunity, and we're going to dive into some discourse in regards to that. Wow, it had to be amazing having an opportunity to interview several of those women. I wonder if you could share a bit about the process and maybe share a bit about some of those interviews and maybe even just the feeling of connecting in my mind with Black literary royalty.
Royalty indeed. Agreed, Ericka. So I am a scholar of African American literature by trade, which means that even though I had another book come out a long time ago and I've done lots of writing, interviews were not part of my skill set. I don't do oral history. This is not something I knew about. So, but I realized, of course, that I had to talk with those women who are still with us, who are willing to chat for this book. So I start calling up my journalist friends, and saying like, so what app do you use to record an interview? And let me see some questions when you interview, folks, what do you do? I also really lucked out because well into the research and writing of this book, the first person I interviewed was the great Black feminist intellectual, Margo Jefferson. Now, Margo is a cultural critic. She is a writer across genres, and she is a master of the interview in her own right. She was incredibly patient with me. And I would say that interviewing Margo Jefferson, and now this was it's important to say, I think, for this group, this was in Eugene over breakfast when the Excelsior was still there because the Oregon Humanities Center had brought Margo here to give a talk. And so we agreed to get together in person. And so that really helped too. The being in person of it, I think, was important. But she kind of taught me how to do a good interview while I was interviewing her. I was really nervous. I also knew a lot by that point. I had a good, by the time I interviewed Margo in 2018, that was 14 years after I had first seen the photograph, and I was a few years into earnestly writing this book. Now, and she boosted my confidence enormously because the interesting thing about this was I believe that there is a place in Black studies work for speculation and critical fabulation and those things, but I don't do that. I only write about things I know I can document and prove. And so it was great chatting with Margo because she confirmed that things I suspected were definitely true. so like the bit I just read about how women in the sisterhood had mostly been in feminist consciousness raising groups in the 60s and 70s, because I kind of had the sense when I would read the guidelines, and like the one member of the group, Lori Sharp, had written guidelines for Black women as like an appendix to existing circulating consciousness raising instructions. So for example, Margot confirmed me. She's like, oh yeah, you're totally on the right track there. We all went to consciousness raising sessions, and that's how we knew how to take turns and like show up on time and do the reading and look at the agenda, you know. So that kind of thing was enormously helpful. Now, it is also the case that with some interviewees, and I would say to some degree Judith Wilson, and especially with Patricia Spears Jones, I would be showing up to sit down for a research interview and handing these incredibly accomplished, brilliant women are copies from the archives of really spicy letters that they wrote in their early 20s. You know, so I'm kind of like sliding across the table, wanting them to tell me about that context and these arguments about the group's purpose or about what they thought about certain books and things like that. And 201, the women were so generous with me in telling me all about those moments, but also beautifully loving and affectionate towards their younger selves of 40 or 50 years ago. Like they liked seeing that, you know, Patricia Spears Jones loved seeing that version of herself in her early 20s, recently moved to New York from Arkansas, you know, coming from a, as she would describe it, poor rural family to New York City and just starting to think she might want to be a poet and writing these letters to the group like, well, I don't know what the purpose of this is anyhow, and I didn't like who said this or that, or people need to start showing up on time. You know, and same thing, Renita Weems and I, same thing. And Renita Weems is one of the most important Black womanist theologians in the country, based in Nashville. And she too was very happy to read these materials and think about her younger self and contextualize it for me. So I was really fortunate with the generosity of these women. I think it's also important to say that there are a number of women in the sisterhood who we're lucky to have still with us, who were like, sounds like a great project, right on, like do it. Here's a research tip, but I don't really want to be interviewed. Like I'm not up for that for any variety of reasons. But some of them are still teaching many writing and literature courses as adjuncts in schools in the New York City area. The Zita Allen, who is one of our most important Black dance critics and published some of the first reviews of Black dance in Dance Magazine, and worked for the Amsterdam News. She was actually finishing her doctorate at Temple while I was writing. She was just too busy with graduate school, you know. So there was actually quite a lot of encouragement for the project, generously from members even who weren't up for the research interview component.
Wow. I mean, I'm thinking and listening to all of these names and how incredible, as a Black woman to think about what you were sharing about how they were just so gracious with you and patient and gave you the opportunity to hone even your own interview skills, right? That you talked about. It sounds very nurturing, like Big Mama. Um, tell me, I know that this is your trade, right? This is what you do, but what was the real inspiration behind writing a book about the sisterhood? Can you give us a clue, a hint into like,
Yes. So, my commitment to the study of African American literature and the teaching African American literature is a lifelong pursuit. So it dates way back. I mean, my undergraduate degree, longer ago than I'd like to say, is a dual degree in English and African American studies. And I have, in some ways, kind of pursued the study of African American literature chronologically. So my undergraduate thesis was about works by Zora Neale Hurston. My master's thesis was about the politics of relationships in James Baldwin's 1962 novel, Another Country. And then my first book, Women's Work, which came out in 2013, was about Black women's novels of the 80s and 90s. And that's really where the genesis of this book is. So we know that 70s, 80s, 90s are a period of dramatically increased visibility for Black women writers, especially novelists. And I say visibility, some people say the boom in Black women writers. I never say that. Black women writers were writing in what would become the United States since before this was a nation. It's not as though suddenly a bunch of Black women started writing in the 70s. So I say period of increased visibility. And my first book, Women's Work, deals with those novels of the 80s and 90s. And, I felt like those books by Paul Marshall, Toni Morrison, Gloria Naylor, Toni K. Bambara, and Ntozake Shange, whom I write about in that book, I knew those were spectacular, important, beautiful, world-changing books. It was also the case that the further away I got from my first book in 2013, the more I realized how spectacular that late 20th century period was. That period that Mary Helen Washington calls a renaissance of Black women writers. And it was more and more that I realized it didn't happen by accident. And so the genesis of this book about the sisterhood is really for me trying to understand how Black women's collaborative behind the scenes work created that moment of increased visibility. So that is how I came to this project.
I bet you have been asked often, even about your interest right early on in undergrad, and thinking about really the study of it and how it would elevate, right? How other people viewed the brilliance, right, of these women and their writing. Someone in the chat asked a question, and as you mentioned, the title Sisterhood, and you mentioned that it was a great choice. Of one of them being that it's racially significant. And so the question from Trina in the chat says, could you elaborate a bit on that? Because many may not associate the word sisterhood having racial connotations.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So yes, the sisterhood was their term decided at the first meeting. And the way that the women in this group use sisterhood and the way I am using it here grows out of 1960s and 70s use of the terms sister and brother to connote politically conscious Black people in an intra-racial dialogue, meaning Black men and women communicating with each other. Now, I understand that we use sisterhood to talk about feminist coalition in other contexts. I understand the phrase sisterhood is powerful circulates, but the context I'm looking at is Black women writers in Black community. And so it's a racially specific term in that context.
Thank you. That's an interesting perspective. I appreciate that. Interesting. Wow. Tell us, you said you had been years into writing this book, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing and publishing? And
Sure.
even the reason why you published with Columbia University Press.
Sure. So in truth, and sometimes this is interesting for people to know, I, like got tenure and then the delay sabbatical in 2015, and then sabbatical was delayed for a year. And then I imagine, my sabbatical moment being when I'm going to really make some progress on book 2. And at that moment, I thought I was going to write a book about African-American foodways literature and like the place of recipes in Black writing and Black cookbooks as literature. Now, ultimately, that just wasn't a book. I had 3 pieces, which I placed for different kinds of audiences. a piece on Entezaki Shange's fabulous little cookbook, If I Can Cook, You Know God Can, which I recommend everyone read. And so I was able to write a piece about that for like an anthology that's an introduction to food studies for the undergraduate classroom. I was able to collaborate with a chef, a vegan activist, a sociologist, and others on a piece for Gastronomica magazine about Black women's food work as critical space. And I was able to publish one piece about the role of food in the recipe format in works by poets Evie Shockley and Harriet Mullen in Contemporary Literature, which is a kind of specific academic journal. And once I realized, oh, those are just 3 shorter pieces, and I don't really want to keep up with the growing field of food studies. And I have this like Sisterhood folder that every time I go to an archive, I'm always digging around for stuff and piecing it together. Oh, that's the book I'm actually writing. So there's that. I was fortunate enough to receive a Public Scholars Award from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So that's an NEH fellowship that's focused on books by scholars that may be of interest to a more general readership, or that they hope will. And, you know, I'm just a regular English professor. Like, I never expected that I would have more than one press interested in publishing a book, or like have an agent, or all the stuff that has come with this. But kind of what happens is you get a fellowship like that and agents start reaching out. And I like, you know, had to call around and talk to friends and whatever. And so then I got in touch, a friend of mine who, Nicholas Boggs, who's finishing what's going to be a really important book on James Baldwin, and liked and was happy with his agent. So I got in touch with her. And so then so that was all new to me. Like, what does it mean to have a literary agent? And so she helped me sort of navigate offers for the book. And when I was down to a few potential presses and a few potential editors, this is a 2-part decision process. The first one is I called around to all these super senior Black women, Black feminist scholars of Black women's writing. So in my field all around the country, to say, so you work with this or that editor, like, what do you think? And I was very nervous as a white woman about producing with a white editor this book about Black women writers. So I will say that 201, those women, including, you know, ones I knew already and ones I was just cold calling, were like, let me call you back. What's your cell phone number? I'm gonna call you right now. I mean, and just really got right on it, talked, and really gave me straight talk about their experiences with a variety of presses and editors. And the word on my fabulous editor, Philip Leventhal at Columbia University Press, was thumbs up all around. They were like, we all know you're surprised that we're all like saying this white guy is the way to go, but he is. And so Philip, let's do right by your work. I also knew that I needed to get the book right, not fast. So it was important for me to work with an editor and a press who was going to let it take as long as it took to get it right. And finally, a major point of this was Columbia University Press for years had been working on developing a program to revive Howard University's long defunct university press. So Howard University, one of our greatest HBCUs, has with Columbia jointly developed a Black Studies series that has now published 3 first books in Black Studies, beginning with Amani Owens's Turn the World Upside Down, which is a study of Caribbean American modernist writers, and most recently, Laura Helton's Scattered Things, which is about Black librarians and collectors and Black archives. So everything that, you know, academic presses are not for profit. So any success that my book might have helps bring Black Studies into that Howard Columbia joint series and helps keep that series going to keep publishing new, vibrant work in the broader field of Black Studies. And that means everything to me, you know, so that's a big part of why I picked them.
That is awesome. I think that's a great segue into another question we received in the chat. And you mentioned being a woman who is not Black and your pursuit of this work. I'm struck by you saying that you wanted to write it, you wanted to do it right and not fast. And this person asked the question, why and how did you decide on this path, right? This seems like, you know, a lifelong passion of uncovering these works and studying of African American literature. And so their question is, how did you decide on this path as a non-Black woman, as a woman who, you said earlier, as a white woman, right?
Mhm.
So what was the driving force and thoughts about allyship? Maybe you can elaborate there.
Hopefully I am not an ally, but I am a John Brown, a co-conspirator. You know,
I love it.
so I hopefully, that's the goal. Now there's a lot of different ways I could answer this question, and I want to offer a few. There's a pretty glib one, but I still think it's worth saying. We don't think you have to be Irish to study James Joyce.
Come
We don't
on.
think you have to be British to study Shakespeare. We don't think you have to be dead to study these authors, right? I mean, so I just, want to put that piece out there. The second piece is, frankly, for me, particularly when it comes to Black women's writing from, let's say, 1945 to the present, I don't understand why anybody wouldn't want to study it. And I think lots of scholars feel that way about their material and their field, right? So there is a kind of basic gut answer of, this is just what it was exciting to me or interesting to me. Thirdly, the teaching and studying African American literature is a way I can foment racial justice in my lane with my skill set. There's a lot of stuff I'm not good at. The thing I'm good at is reading, teaching, studying, and writing books. So my lane is books, and I can foment racial justice with books. And what I mean by that is that African American literature serves different purposes for different students. It might be about, my many students during the protests of 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, having read King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail in my class, being like, this is really helping me as I'm out here protesting. Like, they just sort of see total continuity. Or between, June Jordan and Audre Lorde's poems about racist police violence, from the 70s, right? My students directly see that as useful or comforting or inspirational in their own political action, right? But also, more basically, I have many, many students who have gone on to live their lives as parents, school board members, librarians, elementary school teachers all around the state of Oregon. If those people have read Black books, they will be more just in those jobs, and they will have more people reading more Black books. So that's the in my lane thing. I would also be remiss if I did not say that one way I got on this path was due to the great Reginald Butler, who is the director of the Carter G. Woodson Institute of Afro-American Studies at the University of Virginia in the 90s. And when I was in college as an English major, and this was before we regularly used email to communicate between faculty and students, so I had a paper mailbox. And one day in my paper mailbox, there's a note that says, Courtney, see me, Dr. Butler. And I'm, have taken a couple classes with Dr. Butler, and I'm worried, am I in trouble? What am I doing? And I go into the beautiful Woodson Institute and come in his office, and he says, sit down. And I have a seat. And he says, you're 1 credit away from a second major in African American studies. And so it was a mentor, a teacher paying attention to me and my path, telling me, the stuff you've been doing for electives or just because you're interested, that has amounted to a major in African American studies. So just go take your one history of Africa course, which I did with John Edwin Mason, brilliant photographer and historian of Africa, and completed my major. So it was also about a teacher mentor.
You know what? We have a parallel path in that way. I think many people look at me and say, why do you have a degree in East Asian studies? And it was someone who encouraged me. I had enough credits to get there because I was just interested. So that's so cool to have that story. Thank you for sharing that. And I think even your first point about, we don't have to be white to study American history. We don't have to be Right? A member of a particular lineage, ethnicity, race in order to find things beautiful and interesting and worthwhile. So thank you for your commitment to this work. We have time for one more question, and I wonder, what advice would you give to young writers who draw inspiration from the figures featured in the Sisterhood?
Anything worth doing is done with other people in coalition and collaboration.
Mm,
I mean, that's one important lesson.
mhm,
The work that young writers, artists, activists, thinkers are doing, the work you are doing in collaboration with other people to get free and to free others, the boring, mundane, everyday tasks of that, whether that's about, writing syllabi or attending school board meetings or approving mortgages equitably at the bank where you work, the things you are doing every single day matter and have ripple effects that are lasting in ways you can't possibly imagine. Um, Literature matters to liberation.
oh, that's so good. I'm gonna steal that, okay, to get free.
Please.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Thorson, for being with us today. Your willingness to dive into this topic, your passion for literature and Black women literature in particular, is very, very inspiring. It's so interesting to hear the stories, and we are all enriched and better for having heard from you and shared with you today. Courtney, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Indeed. To all of you who have joined us today, we just want to say thank you to everyone. We ask you to pay attention and look out for an email with the recording of today's lecture in the coming days. We really want to hear from you. We value your feedback. I would encourage you to take a moment, if you can, grab your mobile device, scan the QR code there, and please take the brief survey. Your input is really critical to us to help us tailor upcoming events, to know what your preferences are, what the things are that you'd like to hear about, and they contribute to our ongoing series of really meaningful faculty lectures. Once again, thank you, Carol. Thank you to the Honors College. Thank you to Shannon, Elin, Dr. Thorson. Thank you to all of you who have joined us in the virtual space. Goodbye for now, and I wish you all the very best. Have a great evening.